Thank you. It's a real honor to be here today. I've been asked to talk about how to deal with volatile couples, the ones that come into your office and they're just screaming and yelling at each other, hopping mad, and you're having a hard time getting a word edgewise. So let me talk about some principles that might apply to some of your individual situations, understanding that your situations, our situations can be very, very different. One of my concerns, the most common way to handle that is to only see one person, right? It's a lot safer. I mean, I've been doing this for a lot of years, but I'll have to be honest to tell you that every once in a while when one of the spouses is sick, I go, whew, this one's going to be a lot easier. Because when they both are in the room, it's a little bit stressful, it's a little bit tense, especially in the early stages of working with a couple where they're still really mad at each other. And so, as I've talked to bishops before and ecclesiastical leaders, the one thing I plead for them is just don't see one at a time, because when you see them one at a time, they just come in and tattle on each other, don't they? They just tattle. And it's easy, and you go, oh, I'm so sorry, Sister Jones. Sounds like you have the worst husband in the history of the church. And he's a good bishop. He's a good chaplain. But that's not really helping. I mean, she feels validated, but you haven't really helped the marriage at all. So my first suggestion, without PowerPoints, is see them together at least once or twice or 3 times. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is it's a truth serum. When people come in by themselves and tattle, they say some really interesting things that don't really all the time resemble truth. But when you get both of them in together, they tend to interact. They tend to be each other's lie detector, right? And so if the one's lying, the other one calls them on it, correct? And so if you know you're going to be called on, you're going to be more likely to be truthful. I mean, I've had situations before where the husband said, Dr. Miller, we haven't had sexual intimacy in 3 years. And the wife says, honey, we have a 2-month-old baby, and we both know it takes a while to get pregnant in our relationship. Okay, but it's been a while. But you know, there's a truth serum. My husband hasn't done the dishes for months. And then the husband goes, does that not count last night? Well, he doesn't do it very often. But still, that happens a lot. And having both people in the room at the same time helps you understand the truth with a small t a little bit better. Does that make sense? It helps. Otherwise, you hear all kinds of wild tales. Number 2 is it helps you to observe the dance. One of the things that we do when we work with couples is we want to see how they dance together. I mean, except for, sin, covenant breaking, abuse, and any form of infidelity, you have 2 usually decent people who just cannot dance together well. And they're both frustrated with each other, they're both angry, and they're going to come in and tell you what a bad dancer the other person is. Well, that's interesting, but what you'd like to do as their chaplain, ecclesiastical leader, therapist, or whatever, is to watch them dance. They think you're a referee, but really what you are is you're a dance coach. You are a dance coach, and you're going to watch them dance a little bit, and then you're going to get an idea, which we call assessment, right, of why they can't dance together well. And they tend to come in blaming each other. Brother Miller, metaphorically, we can't dance well, and we both know whose fault it is. He's a klutz. He's an idiot. And you're seeing it through your more professional eyes that these are 2 good people that just fall all over each other and get mad at each other. So it's helpful when they come in really volatile to observe. Remember, it was Elder Bednar, quick to observe. Observe. Don't cut them off too quick because you want to see what the dance is like. Obviously, unless someone's getting hurt or being verbally abused. But you want to watch what the dance is like. You want to. One of the gifts of marriage and family therapy is that we get to observe the dance. At least for a little bit. Now, if it's really volatile, I'm going to cut it off pretty quick. But I want to observe the dance. I want to see how they're dancing together. For example, what I see so often is my husband will not share his feelings. He will not talk. And we both know, Brother Miller, that that's wrong, don't we? They always try to hook you in, right? And so I'm watching it, and so I'm trying to pump this guy up to, why don't you share your feelings? Why don't you share your feelings? This happens so many times. So he finally says, well, I wish that she would be kinder to me. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Can you believe that, Brother Miller? Can you believe he said something so stupid? And the guy just shrinks back down again, doesn't he? And so I'm going, demand withdraw, demand withdraw. She demands him to stand up, and then he tends to withdraw. And the reason why is if he sticks his head out of the hole, he gets it stomped down. That tells me what the dance is. And by the way, it's usually, when I'm as a therapist, it's usually the demander that fires me. When I say, well, I see what you're saying, Sister Jones, but I'm thinking if maybe you'd hold off a little bit and let him actually stick his head out of the tunnel before you smash him, that might help. I knew you'd blame me. I'm out of here. Do you know any good female therapists? My wife. No, I don't want her either. So seeing them together allows you to see the dance. So I encourage you to be brave and see that couple together. Now, there are times when they trigger each other so much that I finally decide, you know what, I need to calm this thing down. I'm going to see each of them individually a little bit to calm it down. But I'm not going to do that at first because I got to watch them dance first. Okay, so what do we do when they're volatile? I'd like to give you 4 suggestions. The first one is, and maybe if it's 5, please forgive me. The first one is to deal at the emotional level. They're coming in emotional. They're coming in flooded, is what John Gottman would say, right? They're coming in flooded. They're coming in emotionally drunk. This isn't a teaching moment. This isn't the time to say, well, Brother and Sister Jones, if you turn to 3 Nephi chapter 11, verses 28 to 30, let's see what the Savior's taught us about contention. No, they're too mad, aren't they? They're too upset. It's not a good teachable moment yet. Now, that's hopefully down the road you can get there, because that's a true doctrine that the Savior teaches, obviously, but not when they're riled up. When they're flooded, your first job is to deflood them, is to calm them down. It's not the time for cognitive behavioral reframing or anything like that. It's not a time for a fun little story. It's a time to calm them down emotionally. One way to do that is simply to listen and validate. What we've learned over the years is if a person feels understood and validated for their perspective and how they feel about things, they tend to calm down. And I've seen this so many times with master therapists. They get riled up and they just actually pull their little wheeled chair right in front of them and says, "You're really upset, aren't you? Tell me about it." And so you really feel this way. You really feel that way. And you just kind of watch them just calm down. Then you turn to the other one. "You're really upset too, aren't you?" And in their mind, they have every right in the world to be upset. And then you validate, you understand where they're coming from, and then they calm down. And now we can work together. But you do that by validating what they say. Validating. Now, the trick of that, when you have 2 people in the room, when it's just one person in the room, it's easy. As I said before, Sister Jones, it sounds like you're married to a mess. And they, oh, yeah, But when you have both of them in the room, and she's saying, she talks first, and she's really upset, angry, upset, and says, "He never helps run the house. Brother Miller, we have 5 kids under 10 years old, and he just sits on his rear end and doesn't do anything, and I'm left to do dun, 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 dun." And so my job is to validate her, because she's upset. It sounds like you feel you're going at this all by yourself, and you feel like it's not fair. That once he comes home from work, he should be helping too. And you kind of watch her start calming down a little bit. And you wish that he'd do his share. You wish that you two were equally yoked in this thing and that you guys were both pulling this covered wagon across the plains together instead of you doing it by yourself and he's kind of out fishing or whatever. And he goes, "Yeah, that's how I feel." Now, that's how she feels, right? Then I turn to him, "So where are you at with this whole thing? She's pretty mad. Where are you at with this whole thing?" And he talks about it being invalidated and underappreciated. "Brother Miller, I did the dishes last night. The last 10 days, I've given the baths to all the kids. But yet everything I do, she doesn't even notice. It's invisible. And I'm so frustrated because it doesn't matter how much I do, Brother Miller, she does not recognize. All she does is hammer on me for not doing anything. You're feeling pretty unappreciated, aren't you? It feels like all your work's invisible. That no matter what you do, it's like you keep putting money in the bank and nothing's happening in the bank account ledger. And then he starts calming down. Now, I've just validated two people that have completely different perspectives, don't they? But yet the goal is to have both of them feel understood and validated, even though they have two different perspectives. That's part of the art of working with couples. It's easy when it's just one person, one-on-one, and they come in and tattle. When you got both of them, in fact, if it's really volatile, I'll say, now I know you completely disagree here, but what you're saying is this. And I know you disagree. I know that you think he is up in the night, but I'm just right now trying to get where he's coming from. And where you're coming from is everything you do is invisible. And you don't get credit for anything. Is that right? And things start calming down a little bit. Validate, validate, validate. Once a person feels understood, they start calming down a little bit. Their biggest fear when they come in to see you as a chaplain or as an ecclesiastical leader is that you won't get it. Your first job is to get it. And the trick of couple work is that you got to get it for two people that see the whole world differently. So validate. Number two is dealing with the emotions. Dealing with the anger. Let me talk about anger. Anger is a secondary emotion. A secondary emotion. This is one of the most helpful things I ever learned in my life. It's a secondary emotion. It's not the primary emotion. Anger is the smoke, it's not the fire. And smoke is a good thing because that allows the smoke detectors in your house to go off and tell you there's a problem, you better do something, but it's not the fire. In fact, if you just chase smoke all your lives, all you do is smell bad and cough a lot, right? You got to go at the fire. Anger is a secondary emotion. It's a signal that something's wrong. The primary emotions are typically three, and then we'll add four here. Number one is frustration. Think about when you get angry with your kids. You love them to death, don't you? When you told them 28 times in a row to turn off the TV and go unload the dishwasher, finally we start feeling a little bit of anger, don't we? It's frustration. Number two is hurt. When someone says something hurtful to us, we tend to, the smoke alarms go off, anger, 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 and it's hurt. Number three is a sense of injustice or unfairness. That was the whole anger of the 70s and the feminist movement, is that they sensed this huge injustice, mainly rightfully founded, and they were mad about it. Life wasn't fair. And I hear that a lot in couples therapy. It's not fair. And then the fourth one I'll add, which is I see more often in military situations, is fear. When you're scared out of your mind, you tend to respond with anger. So the point is don't chase smoke, go after the primary emotions. So a couple comes mad on a hornet in, and they're really angry. I don't attend to the anger, I attend to the hurt. I attend to the frustration. If I come home an hour and a half late from work, and the dinner's cold, the kids are fussy and stuff, and my wife turns to me and lashes at me in an angry tone of voice, I'm probably going to respond, right? And then it's going to be a bad evening. If she says, Rick, I am so frustrated that you didn't call me in this day of cell phones with free data used for telephone calls, that you just didn't call me and tell me that you're running late. The kids have been fussy, and I'm so frustrated. Well, then I need to deal with her frustration, don't I? The fire, those anger, hurt, and injustice and fear are soft emotions. Anger is a hard emotion. Anger is going to be met with anger. An expression of hurt, frustration, or injustice is much more likely to be met with a dialogue. And so when you're working with these couples, change that from anger to you're really frustrated. Can you express your frustration to your spouse? That's going to work 100 times better than go over there and give them a tongue lashing. Finally, structure. if they can't talk to each other in your office, what's the likelihood they're going to do it at home with the baby crying and a lack of sleep and the TV on and Algebra 1 that needs to be attended to? So you're in charge. It's your set. Oftentimes I'll say, this is my office. I'm in charge. I will say who will talk and who won't talk. Now that's after everything else has failed, right? But you can't back down. If your 9-year-old and your 11-year-old are going at it, you just don't go, oh, I'm feeling so powerless. No, you jump in there and you knock it off, don't you? You have the right to do that with a couple. When you're in their office, it's my office. There's words we're not going to use. We're this, and I'll be hard if I need to be. Now, obviously, I don't start that way, do I? But I will be. But I'm going to take control. I'm not going to let anyone get abused in my office. I'm not going to let anyone get verbally lashed out in my office. They can express their feelings. They can express their hurt, frustration, or injustice, but they're not going to be after each other because it's my office. Okay, it's an emotional thing we're talking about here. I was asked to talk about emotions, is what that says. Deal with the emotional level. Then after you calm them down, now we can start sharing scriptures and talking about communication skills and I statements and all that other kind of stuff. But you can't do it when they're flooded and emotionally drunk. You got to get them sober first. You got to calm them down first. You do that by validating and having them feel understood. You do that by by dealing with the anger in a way that's therapeutic and helpful, and you do it by structure. Thanks. What questions do you have?
So I like the concept if it's your office, but I work in a hospital. I don't really get that luxury. So
and probably the government owns it anyway, but go ahead.
Well,
yeah.
Actually, it's a nonprofit hospital,
okay.
So it's civilian. So I don't have that wonderful luxury, so I'm wondering if you got another option for me. I mean, I can call security if it gets that bad, but...
The principle is it's your time. You're in charge. You're the grown-up. You're the parent. You're the you're the one that's in charge. So I would, so maybe this is my time. I was asked to come here to help you, and so I'm gonna be calling the shots here. Again, that's not my first, just like when you're parenting, that's not my first intervention is to play heavy. I mean, I'm going to do all these other things first, but I'm not going to lose. I'm not going to let the 9-year-old and 11-year-old win on me, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I would say, hey, this is my time. I'm going to call the shots if I need to. Other questions, comments? Yes, in the back.
Sir, can you just give me a couple examples of some rules in that structure when you set it up? Like, here are the rules of engagement.
Right.
For this session.
Yeah, and that's actually a pretty good metaphor. I'll talk about how there are rules to engagement. You're right. There's a way to express your feelings. There's a way to play clean and not play dirty. One rule is to stay on one topic at a time. What happens is couples tend to kitchen sink. And pretty soon, and what happens, I mean, I developed some of these ideas when I was at Fort Riley, working with couples. I mean, I was at K-State, but Fort Riley, we were all joined at the hip there. And so I kind of developed some of these metaphors, and part of this is the idea of, I forgot where I was going to go with that. Yeah, the rules of engagement, that there's a way to play fair, and there's these Geneva rules, and so they have to play by the rules, and they're not allowed to use any profanity at each other. I mean, if they're really frustrated and they talk about their frustration and a cuss word comes out, I'm not going to call their bishop or their pastor or anything. But if they're yelling at each other, if they're swearing at each other, that's verbal abuse. So verbal abuse, one person at a time talks, those kind of rules is, and people get that. There's a way to play clean and a way to play dirty, and dirty play isn't okay for me. So one person talks at a time. Anything demeaning, any cussing at each other is not okay. Respect, even if you don't agree, you can still be respectful. Those are the kind of rules that I would introduce. Again, this is necessary. I mean, if it's a sweet couple that are just mad at each other, I'm not going to go through, and here's my 5 words of how, 5 rules. I mean, I introduce them as are appropriate. Oh, that's right. Oh, thank you. most disagreements within couples are just this little regional conflict. I mean, how did World War I start, for crying out loud? This bad guy shot this prince or something, right? Something like that. In Sarajevo, I think. And it turned in this horrendous, horrible World War I, the Great War. And that's what happens with couples. It just starts out with me being an hour and a half late, and then she calls me on it, and then all of a sudden I bring up the fact that she talks to her mom too much on the phone. Then she brings up the fact, and pretty soon this little skirmish turns in this glow. Well, my mom was right, I should have never married you. And so that's one of the things that couples do. And so one of the rules are one topic at a time. If we're going to talk about me being home coming home late from work and not telling my wife, then let's talk about that. But we're not going to talk about the France and Russian alliance and all. We're not going to talk about anything else. That's off limits. We're going to talk about this one issue. Does that make sense? That keeps it a regional skirmish rather than the Great War.
This question is going to show my own inadequacies here, but in a case where you know the couple, and in your opinion, your professional opinion, this woman is a psycho. You know, that's your professional opinion, of course. But then come to find out they approach you and they want you to help them solve your problems. How do you remove your own personal biases, or when you see something that when somebody's bringing a pretty legitimate problem, and you in your own mind would be going, man, I would divorce her too, or I would divorce him too. How do you remove yourself from that and maintain a unbiased, help them in an unbiased way?
One idea would be if I had that, like say someone's borderline or something like that, I'd oftentimes have an outside assessment. In your situation, I'd refer them to what I don't call it, the psychology guys. Yeah, and have an objective, especially if you know them. That's not going to fly very well. Yeah. So here's a principle I wanted to talk about. I'm glad you brought it up. This is my last 3 or 4 sentences here. And that is, I was taught by my trainer, by the way. I was trained, and some of you old people will recognize this name. Your younger ones won't. But Crawford Broderick was at USC for years and years and years. I studied under Crawford Broderick. I went to USC specifically to be trained by him. Marvelous person, died of cancer way too soon in the mid-90s. But one of the things he taught me, I've never forgotten, and this applies to adolescents, it applies to spouses, is that you work with people based on the pain they are in and not on the pain they are causing. I've never forgotten that. Does that make sense? And that helps me connect with adulterers who's caused all kinds of pain. Brother Jones, you are scared to death, aren't you? You are scared to death your wife's going to walk out on you. And then he goes from being this to the tears start flowing. You're right, Brother Mill, I'm scared to death. And now I got him. I mean, he still has to go through some repentance processes, right? And we got to heal the marriage, but at least he's not being belligerent and defensive with me. You treat people according to the pain they are in and not the pain they are causing. And that allows you to get in and start working with people. Thank you.